The archives that time did not erase. Starting in 2017, the United States government began releasing several batches of documents related to the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1963. It is common practice for governments to keep important documents classified, releasing them decades after the events they concern, whether for reasons of national security, to avoid embarrassing institutions or individuals, for legal proceedings, or simply to keep certain suspicious activities hidden from public view. But for those who remain skeptical, the prolonged secrecy fuels something far greater. What has still not been revealed? The 1992 law, heavily influenced by Oliver Stone's film JFK, required all documents related to the case to be gathered into a single archive. Even so, in 2017, then-President Donald Trump delayed the release of part of the files at the request of the CIA and FBI, citing national security risks. In 2021 and 2022, new batches were released. But one question persists. Why, more than 60 years later, are there still censored pages? Perhaps the greatest example of secret archives being made public occurred after the reunification of Germany, when documents from the former East Germany came to light, revealing networks of surveillance and espionage previously unimaginable. If that happened there, what could be hidden in the files on JFK? November 22, 1963, the day the world stopped. In Kennedy's case, the mystery runs even deeper. He was assassinated on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, while riding in an open motorcade through Dealey Plaza. At his side was First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. The world watched in shock as images that would become some of the most analyzed footage in history were captured. The famous Zapruder film, shot by an ordinary citizen, became a central piece of evidence in decades of investigation. Kennedy had been elected in 1960, defeating Richard Nixon by an extremely narrow margin, less than 0.2% of the popular vote. He was the youngest elected president in United States history, the first Catholic to hold the office, and a symbol of a generation that believed in change. His death, therefore, was not merely the end of a man, it was the end of an era. The official version and its cracks. The official version holds that Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine who had lived in the Soviet Union between 1959 and 1962, fired alone from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. 2 days later, on November 24th, before he could be brought to trial, Oswald was shot and killed live on television by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with murky ties to organized crime. Coincidence? A cover-up? Deliberate silencing? The official investigation concluded that Oswald acted alone. Yet countless inconsistencies continue to fuel doubt to this day. Ignored witnesses, reports of shots fired from another direction, the theory of a second shooter, positioned behind a wooden fence on what became known as the grassy knoll. The controversial magic bullet, which, according to the Warren Commission, would have traveled anatomically impossible trajectories to strike both Kennedy and Governor John Connally. Why so many contradictions? In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, reached a different conclusion from the Warren Commission. There was a probability of a conspiracy involving at least 2 shooters, based on acoustic analyses recorded by a police microphone. The report was controversial and swiftly marginalized by the intelligence agencies. Cuba, the knot that won't come undone. Some theories point to the American Mafia, which had lost millions when the casinos in Cuba were shut down following Fidel Castro's revolution in 1959. Figures such as Santo Traficante Jr. and Carlos Marcello had both financial and political motives to eliminate Kennedy, especially after the president's brother, Robert Kennedy, intensified investigations into organized crime in his role as Attorney General. Other suspicions fall on the CIA itself, deeply discontented with Kennedy's diplomatic decisions, particularly after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961, when the president refused to authorize American air support and publicly blamed the agency for the disaster. Could there have been a deep state operating in the shadows, determined to eliminate a president who dared to challenge the military and intelligence establishment? There is also the theory involving anti-Castro Cuban exiles, groups trained by the CIA and humiliated by the failure at the Bay of Pigs, who may have come to see Kennedy as a traitor. Operation Mongoose, a covert program designed to destabilize Cuba, was in full swing when Kennedy was killed.
The Cold War and the Soviet specter. And what of the Soviet Union? In the depths of the Cold War, following the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, When the world stood less than 24 hours from nuclear war, Moscow had every reason to fear Kennedy and to want him silenced. Oswald had defected to the USSR, married a Soviet citizen named Marina Prusakova, and returned to the United States just months before the assassination. Coincidence? Or a move in a far darker geopolitical chess game? The KGB itself investigated whether Kennedy's assassination had been carried out by right-wing American extremists who feared a rapprochement between the two countries. Soviet documents, partially declassified after the end of the Cold War, suggest that Moscow was just as shocked as Washington and deeply afraid of being held responsible. LBJ, the mob, and the shadows of power. Suspicion has also fallen on Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was sworn into office just 2 hours after the assassination, aboard Air Force One, taking the oath of office beside a Jacqueline Kennedy still wearing her blood-stained dress. Strategic urgency, or part of a larger plan? After all, wasn't it Johnson himself who proposed and organized the trip to Texas? The mobster Sam Giancana, who had allegedly collaborated with the CIA on covert operations against Castro, including plots to assassinate Fidel, also surfaces in parallel accounts and investigations. In June 1975, just days before he was scheduled to testify before the Senate's Church Committee about his connections to the CIA and the Kennedy assassination, Giancana was shot and killed in his own kitchen in Oak Park, Illinois. His killer was never identified. Another coincidence? What is still being hidden? Decades later, documents continue to be released, but not all of them. Certain passages remain classified, reportedly at the request of agencies such as the FBI and CIA. In 2023, President Joe Biden authorized a new round of releases, but analysts estimate that hundreds of pages of information are still being withheld. What is still hidden? Institutional protection, or the final piece of a puzzle that would change history forever? A recent theory, based on documents released after 2017, suggests that the CIA was aware of Oswald's existence and was monitoring his movements prior to the assassination, but deliberately suppressed that information from the Warren Commission. If true, this does not prove a conspiracy, but it raises an even more unsettling question. What else was deliberately concealed? One man alone, or a global conspiracy? More than 60 years later, the assassination of JFK remains one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century.